more than enough money for all of us to fly home first class.
It's just before dawn.
She had everything the 60s promised: beauty, fame, and freedom. But behind the music that defined a generation, her life was unraveling. A golden voice, a golden face, and a world that turned darker with every encore. She was adored by millions, yet abandoned by those she trusted most. In the summer of love, Michelle Phillips was living a dream. But what happens when the dream becomes a cage? Tonight, we step into the private world of a woman who sang of California sunshine while surviving storms few ever saw coming. At first glance, she seemed untouchable, the last surviving member of the Mamas and the Papas. Michelle Phillips remains frozen in time, her beauty intact, her smile immortal. But the truth beneath that golden image tells a story of heartbreak, reinvention, and quiet endurance. She lived through betrayals that would have shattered most people, witnessed the deaths of her closest friends, and carried the burden of a generation's illusions fading away. She was born Holly Michelle Gilliam in Long Beach, California, on June 4th, 1944, to a family that was constantly in motion. Her father, Gardner Burnett Gilliam, was a writer and pilot whose restless ambition carried the family from coast to coast. Her mother, Joyce, was an artist and dreamer. The marriage didn't last, and when Michelle was just 6, her parents divorced. Her mother's sudden death a few years later would leave a mark that never quite faded. In interviews decades later, Michelle would recall that moment with quiet restraint, never dramatizing it, but acknowledging that something in her changed forever. She learned early how fragile home could be. By her teenage years, Michelle's life was already a story of contrasts. Convent school discipline in Mexico City, followed by the freedom of California beaches. She spoke fluent Spanish, modeled part-time, and dreamed of something larger than the domestic futures offered to women of her generation. Music was her secret refuge. The folk revival was blossoming, and Los Angeles was becoming a crossroads of poetry, rebellion, and melody. In smoky cafes from Venice to Laurel Canyon, a new kind of America was being born. Michelle found herself drawn to it like a tide. It was there she met John Phillips, older, magnetic, and already married with children. He was leading a folk group called the Journeymen, and possessed both the brilliance and arrogance that often come with ambition. For Michelle, John seemed worldly, dangerous, and irresistible. Their relationship began in a blur of music and defiance. By 1962, she was barely 18 when she married him, stepping into a life that would elevate her to unimaginable fame and destroy her innocence in the process. John Phillips had a gift for control. He composed with mathematical precision, arranged harmonies with symphonic flair, and managed people like a general. When he met Denny Doherty, a Canadian singer with an angelic tenor, and Cass Elliot, a powerhouse voice without emotional depth, a new idea formed. Together, they became the Mamas and the Papas. Michelle, the youngest and most ethereal, was the final piece of face for the sound that would define the decade. Their success was immediate and staggering. The first album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, exploded in 1966, fueled by the haunting melancholy of California Dreamin' and the bittersweet optimism of Monday, Monday. The harmonies were lush and cinematic, the lyrics deceptively simple. They weren't just making pop songs, they were capturing the longing of an entire generation, trapped between post-war conformity and the promise of freedom. To the public, they embodied the California ideal: sunshine, sensuality, and rebellion without consequence. But inside the group, everything was combustible. John's controlling nature collided with Cass's independence, and the emotional entanglements grew messy. Denny fell in love with Michelle. Michelle, already disillusioned with John's infidelities and volatile moods, fell back. What began as chemistry on stage became chaos off it. When John discovered the affair, the fallout was volcanic. He reportedly fired her from the band, replacing her with Jill Gibson. Fans noticed instantly. The magic was gone. The record label panicked. Within weeks, Michelle was reinstated, not because wounds had healed, but because commerce demanded it. Their next album, The Mamas and the Papas, was a masterpiece of fragile collaboration. You can almost hear the heartbreak buried in the harmonies. As fame intensified, so did the excess. Los Angeles in the mid-60s was an experiment in freedom with no rules. Laurel Canyon became a magnet for artists, poets, and addicts. Music was a currency, and love was a language no one spoke fluently. Michelle moved through that world with elegance and danger, attending parties where legends were being born, and lives were quietly unraveling. Drugs flowed freely, and so did betrayals. It felt like it would never end, she once said. And that was the problem, it did. By 1968, the dream had curdled. The group fractured under its own weight, each member lost to addiction, jealousy, or exhaustion. The hippie optimism of California dreamin' had turned into the paranoia of late 60s Los Angeles, a place where idolism collided with greed. Michelle watched it all crumble. Cass Elliot pursued a solo career, achieving some success but struggling with loneliness. John descended into hard drugs and controlling delusion. Denny drifted in and out of music, haunted by guilt. For Michelle, it was the beginning of a long reckoning. She was barely 24, divorced, and trying to rebuild her identity in an industry that didn't forgive easily. Hollywood wanted her beauty, but not her pain. In 1970, she married actor Dennis Hopper, a union that lasted just 8 days. Hopper later called it a cosmic mistake. Michelle, with her trademark composure, simply said, "It was chaos from start to finish." That same year, tragedy struck. Cass Elliot died in London after a concert, just 32 years old. The news shattered Michelle. Cass had been the band's emotional core, the voice that made their songs immortal. Despite past tensions, their bond was deep. Cass was like a sister, Michelle said quietly. When she died, it felt like the end of something much bigger than us. Her death marked the symbolic close of the 60s dream. In the following decade, Michelle sought reinvention. Acting became her salvation. She starred in Dillinger, 1973, earning a Golden Globe nomination, then appeared in films like Valentino, Savage Harvest, and The Man with Bogart's Face. Hollywood noticed her discipline and subtlety. Unlike many musicians who crossed over, she took the craft seriously. Yet even as her acting career grew, she remained tethered to the ghost of the mamas and the papas. Every interview, every headline, circled back to the band that had both made and unmade her. The 70s in Los Angeles were darker than the 60s, an era of broken illusions. The Laurel Canyon community that once symbolized freedom was dissolving into addiction and isolation. John Phillips spiraled further into drugs, his creativity collapsing under paranoia. Michelle navigated that wreckage quietly, raising her daughter Chinna and working steadily. She understood, perhaps better than most, that survival meant adaptation. Her personal life remained turbulent. She had affairs with powerful men, directors, producers, musicians, but few offered real stability. She saw fame from both sides, the ecstasy of adoration and the emptiness of being desired for image alone. "People wanted me to be the California girl," she said. "They didn't want to know what it cost." In 1977, she released her only solo album, Victim of Romance, produced by Jack Nitzsche. Critics praised it for its vulnerability and polish, but it sold poorly. Listeners, it seemed, preferred the myth to the woman. The record was an elegy for lost innocence, a final graceful bow to the dream that had defined her youth. Through the 80s, she found stability in television, appearing in Knots Landing and later Beverly Hills 90210. The roles kept her visible, but more importantly, they gave her structure. The chaos of her past had taught her to value routine. Behind the camera, she was admired for professionalism and warmth. Those who worked with her often remarked how she carried the calm of someone who had seen the worst and chosen peace. Meanwhile, her daughter Chinna Phillips was stepping into her own spotlight. In the early 90s, Wilson Phillips became one of the decade's biggest pop acts. Their hit Hold On resonated with themes of endurance and emotional healing, echoes of Michelle's own story. Watching her daughter succeed gave her pride tinged with nostalgia. "I saw her go through it, the attention, the pressure," Michelle said. "But I also saw her strength. Maybe she learned that from me." The later years brought a different kind of reckoning. John Phillips's arrest for drug trafficking in 1980 exposed the depths of his addiction. His memoirs, released before his death in 2001, revealed disturbing personal details that forced Michelle to confront a past she'd tried to outgrow. She responded with dignity, rarely engaging in public mudslinging. "John was a genius," she said, "but genius doesn't make you good at life." As time passed, Michelle became one of the few remaining witnesses to an era both glorified and misunderstood. Documentaries, interviews, and retrospectives sought her perspective. She spoke candidly, but carefully, preserving what mattered and letting the rest dissolve into memory. "People romanticize the 60s, she said. "They forget how much heartbreak came with the beauty. There's something haunting about Michelle Phillips's survival. While her contemporaries burned out, she endured aging gracefully, maintaining her privacy, and occasionally stepping back into the spotlight for tributes or reunions. Her life became proof that survival, not sensation, is the true measure of strength. Even in old age, her presence commands a quiet fascination. She embodies an era when music was rebellion, when love was an experiment, and when beauty was both weapon and curse. The California dream she helped create eventually devoured itself, but she remains the dream's last keeper. "I think about those days often," she admitted. "We were young, reckless, and full of hope. We thought it would last forever. Nothing does, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Looking back now, it's hard not to see the poetry in her arc. From convent school girl to counterculture icon, from betrayed wife to seasoned actress, Michelle Phillips lived every life the 20th century offered. The charm never left her, but neither did the scars. Behind her laughter lies the memory of those who didn't make it: Cass, Denny, John. The harmonies remain, but the voices are gone. When she steps onto a stage today, gray-haired, poised, and quietly radiant, the applause carries more than nostalgia. It's gratitude. For the songs, yes, but also for the endurance. The woman who once sang of dreaming didn't just survive the end of that dream, she walked through its ruins and kept going. Her story isn't one of tragedy alone. It's about transformation. The young girl who thought love could save everything grew into a woman who understood that saving yourself sometimes means walking away. Fame gave her everything and took nearly as much. But in the end, Michelle Phillips claimed something rarer: peace. If the 60s were about breaking rules, her later life was about learning which ones to keep. She became proof that beauty doesn't have to vanish, that grace can coexist with truth, and that the survivors of an era still have stories worth listening to. And maybe that's what keeps her legend alive: not the songs, not the scandals, but the silence that followed. The dignity of a woman who learned how to live after the music stopped. So when you hear California Dreamin' again, listen closely. Beneath those harmonies lies the echo of everything Michelle Phillips endured and overcame. It isn't just a song about longing, it's a song about survival. If stories like this speak to you about the cost of fame, the beauty of endurance, and the women who refuse to disappear, subscribe, stay curious, and remember, even the brightest California dreams cast the longest shadows.